Joining us, those of you that are here in person and those of you that are joining us online, we really appreciate it. You just saw on the screen our IF gathering. This is for our ladies. That is coming up on March 5th and 6th. And on your screen right now, if we can get our timing amazingly, there should be a QR code right there showing up. You can scan that to get registered for the event. We're going to have Shiplap is going to be helping us with coffee and donuts in the morning, and then the Masonry Cafe is going to be providing lunch for us on Saturday. So the registration for it, we're not asking for anything. It costs us about $25 for people to be there, but just if you want, pay whatever you feel led to pay for something like that. So there's only about 50 spots available, and they're filling up fast. So get in while you can. This Wednesday at 5:45, we're going to have our student ministries again. So teens, be there and invite your friends. We would love to have you there. It's going to be from about 5:45 to about 7 o'clock. We try to finish on time, so be there. We would love to have you. And thank you, everybody, for using the RSVP link this week. Really appreciate it, even though you didn't really get to come and be here, most of you. So use it again next week. We would really, really appreciate it. And I'm going to open us up in prayer, and then you'll get to see Devin up here. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, I just thank you for allowing everyone to join us, giving us the ability to have the technology to have people join us, even though they're snowed in or not able to make it here in person, Lord. I just thank you for everyone and their dedication, Lord. I thank you for Devin and his willingness to serve you and to bring us your word today. Amen.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Well, good morning, guys. I'm actually, so we canceled our in-person and live services this morning, but I'm actually super glad we had some people show up, so thank you very much. It's like way harder to talk to an empty group of seats out there. Like, you would be surprised at how difficult that is to like seem like you're engaged and you're looking around the room and there's nobody here. So it's like way easier when I actually have a few people here, friendly faces. So thank you guys for coming out and braving the weather and all that stuff. Again, thank you guys for being here. I hope you've enjoyed the snow. If you don't like snow, then this has probably been a pretty rough season for you, right? But luckily it only happens a couple times a year typically for us, and then it's over. I think it's actually raining outside now, so it'll be over pretty quickly, I think. If you've been following along with us in our Waypoints series, then you're going to notice this morning that I'm actually not picking up where we left off last week. So if we were going to pick up where we left off last week, we should be talking about divorce this week. And it isn't that I don't want to talk about divorce or that I didn't want to like go into that and launch into that this week. It's just that I actually overplanned last week. We had Options Pregnancy here. We had Ben here leading worship for us and all that. And so by the end of the week, I was like, dude, there's no way I'm going to be able to cover all of this and it not be like a 2-hour long service. And so we actually moved that, but it's an incredibly important topic and one that I think that Jesus actually has some really good news for us on. And so we are going to reattack that. We're going to talk about that at the end of our series. So we will be coming back to that, but I just didn't want you to think that I was like skipping over that or like we weren't going to cover that. We're going to cover that later on in our series, right? So, and if you've not been paying attention to that, then this isn't news to you at all, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, so thank you guys again for being here. And this morning we've titled our sermon, Don't Believe the Hype. And we're actually going to be talking about Jesus' words about truth and spin and the ways that we use truth and spin and inconsistencies in our language and our speech and our actions to actually benefit ourselves. And this is a really big deal. And I want to share a story about where I learned to not believe the hype. I was a new airman, just went into the Air Force. This was actually my first year in the Air Force, and I learned about Christmas bonuses. So for any of our people here in the military, Christmas bonus, have you ever got one? No, absolutely not, right? No such thing as a Christmas bonus, and maybe you've heard this and maybe not, but I promise you're going to get like a laugh out of this. So I was sitting in the office one day, and my supervisor, another individual, comes in, and they're talking loudly. It's right around Christmas time about the Christmas bonus and like what they were going to do with the Christmas bonus. I'm like, dude, well, I obviously like perk right up because I didn't know this. This is like new information for me. And it should have keyed me in because they were like all too willing to like include me sort of in the conversation once we got started on this. And they were like, oh yeah, you just have to go to finance. And this should have keyed me in. They said, you just have to ask for the form 1225. Get it? 1225. I was like, dude, why did I not? Like, why was that not a red flag for me? And I never forget, I bugged my supervisor all day, and at the end of the day, she was finally like, yes, you can go to finance. And I just went in, I asked for the 1225, and the look on the girl's face, I said, there's no such thing as a Christmas bonus, is there? She's like, I'm so sorry, there's definitely not. And I was like, dude, I couldn't even be mad about it, right? Like, I wasn't even mad, it was so good, man. I was like, I really appreciated the pranking. And I wish I could say that that's where I learned, like, the lesson, but it was not. Because I actually went on, it was so good that I actually, like, perpetuated this in, like, several generations of new airmen. And The year I learned that this was like not a good thing, one of the last years I was down in Florida, and I had this troop, and he was just like that guy, right? Like the Friday afternoon commanders call, like safety briefings. You know, everybody just wants to go home. The commander asks the obligatory, like, does anyone have any questions? Auditorium of 300 people. My troop was the guy that like raised his hand. It was like he was that guy that had the question at the end of the safety briefing, and so he totally had it coming, right? And so Christmas time rolls around, and he's like getting the whole Christmas bonus treatment, and he buys it, man, hook, line, and sinker, and brand new airmen, like kids and all this stuff. And he bugged me all day. I come in at the end of the day, and he is on Amazon about to hit buy on a new like 70-inch flat screen TV. And I was like, bro, what are you doing? He's like, I'm spending some of that Christmas bonus money early. And I was like, oh no. I was like, please do not do that, right? And so we had to like come clean with him. And it was that moment I realized like, dude, you know, it's actually, it seems kind of benign and harmless, but the reality is like there's actually some real like maybe some real inherent dangers in this, right? And all of a sudden, like, this thing that was just sort of a harmless joke, I realized that, like, actually, man, this could have been really bad for this individual. Like, that would have been a major, like, disruptive financial decision for them to have spent, like, you know, $1,500 on a 70-inch TV, right? Right around Christmas time. So, needless to say, I didn't join in the Christmas bonus festivities anymore after that, right? But this is actually our culture, and we're living in the results of this, right? Not one instance of this, but like 7 billion instances of this every single day as we make choices, as we think there's like this invisible line around the truth that if we only cross it so far that then it becomes dangerous for us, right? But the reality is like, man, truth is truth and lies are lies, and anytime we cross that barrier, it is instantly dangerous. It instantly has negative repercussions and impact. And so we're seeing this. We're seeing the outworkings of this in our society today, right? Like nothing can be taken at face value anymore. Nothing, absolutely nothing can be taken at face value. We find ourselves always reaching below the surface to try to decipher what was actually meant by what was said, right? What is their motives behind that statement so that we can classify them, you know, into some category in our head that, oh, you think this way or you do this thing, right? It isn't necessarily just what they say anymore. It's what lies underneath that. It's no longer truth that we measure our political candidates by, right? Our leadership. Instead, it's the amount of lies propagated by the other side of the aisle, right? I want you to think about that statement for just a second, right? Both sides, left and right, have been caught in so many half-truths, like conveniently left out details and outright lies, that truth can no longer be the standard by which we measure our leadership by. And so now every campaign, every like move of legislation is this like aggressive mudslinging smear campaign, right? That's designed to inflict maximum damage. And the one who can inflict the most damage, or the one who can like survive and come out of that maybe partially unscathed, like they win popular opinion at the end of the day. It's never just about what's best for people. Instead, it's always about why the other side is just the absolute worst, right? And again, it may sound like semantics, but that is actually a fundamentally different approach than what our nation's forefathers intended. And I don't have to tell you why, even within like the last 6 weeks, that has been incredibly damaging to this country and the world that we live in. The results of this is that there's like wide-ranging, baseless conspiracy theories, fake news, accusations, like national public hypocrisies that come to light, like both inside the church and outside of the church. Things that were once unacceptable for proper society have now become mainstream. And this isn't because these things have become any more real than they used to be. It's because now we don't know what truth is anymore, right? There was a show I was watching on Netflix, and he was talking about the deep fakes. Have you guys seen these on the internet? Deep fakes, right? This is incredible. Like they can like mash somebody's face over somebody else's, and it's like funny when it's like Oprah Winfrey like shredding down a mountain on like a snowboard, right? Like that's kind of funny, but maybe a little less funny when it's like a political figure or someone in government that all of a sudden now their face gets added to something, or their words or whatever gets mashed into something that's actually incredibly dangerous. And I'll never forget the interviewer on the Netflix show was talking to this expert witness, and he was saying that the danger isn't in being able to tell what's fake, right? Like we're actually beyond that. They are so good now that it's almost impossible to tell what's fake from what's real. The problem is that it begins to generate this culture where now we can't actually trust what's true in our culture. And that may sound like semantics, but there's a fundamental shift in the way that our society has handled truth over like the last couple of decades, really. And it isn't just out there. It isn't something that's just in like the halls of our nation's capital. It isn't some distant like phenomenon in classrooms or universities or issues of social, moral, or economical progress. Actually, this is ingrained in every aspect of our culture. And I know that I like beat up on social media all the time, so I'm not going to do that this morning, right? But like, what's the danger in having like this expectation of this carefully curated like version of yourself that we put out on social media, right? It's like there's this real version of us, but then there's this carefully like curated version of us that's like all of the best pictures, the thing that's been doctored and retouched and remastered, right? And the things that maybe aren't the most true version of us out there. And then what about the people that don't do that, but yet are still on social media? They're largely silent on there. What does that create in the people who don't engage in those things? Oftentimes it makes them critical or like cynical about other people and the people that do engage in those sorts of things. And so like it doesn't create anything good. So here's the bottom line, right? I've talked for like 5 minutes on this stuff. And like the different directions that it goes are endless. The problems that it causes and creates in our culture are like, they're endless. It touches every domain of our life. And honestly, man, it is incredibly stressful as you begin to think about these things, right? Not just like the fake news or the spin or the lies and the half-truths by our political leaders or whatever, right? Like it isn't just that. Like what's really stressful about this is like, how do we actually fix this, right? When nothing can be trusted as unbiased or true, like what's the solution to this problem that is like plaguing our culture? And that is what is like absolutely stressful about this whole thing, right? This is actually an incredibly complex issue, and at its root, it is related to our tendency to put spin on our words, to twist the truth, to make ourselves look better, to increase hype, to try to win people to our side, to make a point, right? And although each individual action may seem fairly benign, like the whole Christmas bonus thing, when you multiply the effects of that by 7 billion people doing it multiple times a day, it's no wonder that our world is where it is today over this issue of truth. And what is truth, right? And how do we know what truth is, and who's actually the beholders of truth? And luckily for us, this is actually the very issue that Jesus is going to go into today in the Sermon on the Mount. This is something incredibly important that was a problem in Jesus' day that he's going to address to us. And so I want to just remind you as we launch into this, Jesus is inaugurating this new kingdom, this group of like new people, new humanity, right? That is like committed to living out his ethics of his rule and his reign. That Jesus' kingdom isn't a kingdom of borders, right? Like it's only so far, that his kingdom comes. That his kingdom is where his rule and his reign are extended perfectly. And as such, he is calling a new group of people to follow after his rule and his reign, right? And he begins to talk about this issue of like how we represent ourselves and what we say and how that really actually matters a lot. And right out of the gate, Jesus calls us all icebergs. Do you know what I mean by that? That we have this part of ourselves that we portray to the rest of the world that sort of sticks out of the water, right? And it's actually a pretty small part of ourselves. And yet, there's this whole other side that exists hidden under the surface, beneath our words, beneath that carefully curated version of ourselves that we put on social media and out there for the rest of the world to see. And what lies under the surface is massive and can actually be quite damaging to others when the truth is finally revealed and they run aground of our half-truths, our distorted realities, our hypocrisies, our inconsistencies, right? And we know this. We've seen the damage that this causes in personal relationships and families, and like places of work, right? This is an incredibly damaging thing, and Jesus actually addresses it this morning. So you guys good? You ready, right? Jesus is going to address the heart-level issue behind this, and here we go. Matthew chapter 5, verse 33. This is how he starts. He says, "Again, you have heard that the ancients were told, you shall not make false vows, but you shall fulfill your vows to the Lord." Like, who makes vows regularly, right? Yeah, nobody, probably. That's not like something that we do nowadays, is to make vows. So here's the deal. Up to this point, Jesus has been laying down like a single Old Testament command, right? He says, don't murder. You should not commit adultery. You shouldn't do, right? Like you've heard it said, and he lays down some teaching about divorce, right? These are these Old Testament commands. And then he lays down his teaching alongside of it, right? And up to this point, it's been a very specific, like, single command from either like just somewhere in the law or even the 10 Commandments, right? Like, thou shalt not murder. And so Jesus then goes on to talk about like murder and stuff. But this one is a little bit different, that it isn't just one single command. Actually, Jesus is drawing on several different Old Testament commands. So if you have your Bibles and you see like you have those references on there, I guarantee you that has Exodus 20 verse 7, right? You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave him unpunished who takes his name in vain. If you have one of those Bibles, it probably has Exodus 20:16. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. It also has Leviticus 19:11 and 12. It says, you shall not steal, nor deal falsely, nor lie to one another. You shall not swear falsely by my name, so as to profane the name of your God. I am the Lord, right? And so if you have like a reference Bible or whatever, and you read Jesus' words in Matthew chapter 5, it's gonna reference these three at least, and probably 3 or 4 more other like references in the Old Testament that deal with the same general topic. So let's talk about swearing for just a second, right? So in our culture, swearing has to do with using like foul language, right? And so if we superimpose our understanding of like what swearing means, and if you like have a different version of the Bible, it may say swear an oath or swear you shall not swear an oath before God, right? It's one of the versions of this. So if we superimpose our understanding, we typically walk away thinking that we shouldn't like add swear words before God's name or after God's name, right? Like we hear that, like we don't, to take God's name in vain is to use like foul language in association with God's name, right? Now here's the deal, it's a bad thing, we shouldn't do that, but that's absolutely not what's going on in this verse. This is not what taking God's name in vain actually means at all, right? Is that news to anyone? Is that new stuff, right? So that's not what this is about at all. Maybe a story to help unpack like what's actually going on here. Let's say that you live in Jesus' day, right? And you're a farmer. I don't know, let's say you farm like olives or something. And you have a neighbor, and he also farms olives, but he hates you, and he just like absolutely despises you. I don't know, maybe like your olives are always better, and you put like pimentos in your olives or something, or like, I don't know, like you have really cool little glass containers that you put olive oil in, and it sells really good at market. I don't know, but he hates you. And one day he comes to your house, and he says, man, you stole my donkey, right? And you're like, bro, I did not. I don't even need your donkey. Your donkey is like 1 eye and 3 legs. I don't want your donkey, right? And you're like, no, man, I know that you stole my donkey, and I'm actually going to take you to court over this. And so he goes, and they didn't have like a courthouse, and so what he would have done would have been taking you to like the city gates, and he would have met with some elders and some city officials there, and this is sort of where like the business of the city would have happened at. And he comes and he accuses you in front of this group of elders. And he says, man, this guy stole my donkey. He's just that he's like the donkey stealing type of dude, right? And I know this. And I said, well, do you have any proof? Like, did you see this? And he says, no. At this time, he's going to swear before God. He says, I swear before Yahweh that he stole my donkey. And all of a sudden, he has now invoked God as his like witness in this. There weren't any witnesses, there wasn't anybody there to like watch this thing go down. And he has like invoked God. So that if God were like on the stand right now, that God would testify that what he is saying is true in this moment, right? He is swearing on God, Yahweh. And they look at you and they say, man, this is serious. He has just sworn on God. Like he's invoked God as his witness. Do you have anyone that you can bring as a witness that says that you didn't steal his donkey? And you say, no, I don't. And but I didn't steal it, right? You can check my house or whatever. So no, I'm sorry. You're going to owe him the price of the donkey. So you got to pay. You would have had to have paid for his donkey. And it was that simple. And then let's say like a couple of days later he goes home and it turns out his brother borrowed his three-legged, one-eyed donkey, right? Like, and it's like, no, man, I just needed to borrow it to like do something at my house. And all of a sudden now, what's happened in this moment is you've drug God into your mess, into your crookedness, into like your hatred of this other guy. And you sort of like got God to stamp his seal of approval over your actions and what you've just done, right? The idea is that you have invoked God's name as this higher authority that will testify to your truthfulness. Invoking God's name is a power move, essentially like stating that God would stand by as a faithful witness to your statement or your actions, right? And so instantly, like many of you guys that are listening to this, you feel no more connected to this verse than when we started, right? Because again, do we do this? Maybe outside of saying like, I swear to God or something like that, right? So obviously don't do that. That's part of this. Don't do that, right? But we don't, this isn't something that we like do in our culture, is it? Like we take an oath maybe if we go to like court for something, but that's a different story. There's some different things going on in that we don't have time to go into this morning, right? No, we don't actually do this, but I think that there's actually something much deeper going on here in these commands, right? The point of not taking God's name in vain is about not taking God's holiness, his uniqueness, and his goodness and associating it with our own distortion of the truth. And so what happens when God's goodness gets associated with my crookedness, right, is it now defiles it, right? Like we have taken God's name and we have associated it with our actions, our words, and all of a sudden those things turn out as fake, false, lies, or whatever. What have we done to God's reputation in this moment, right? I think we see a couple things. First, we see that this is about abusing God's reputation. Now, do we ever do this? Yeah. Have Christians ever been known to claim one thing about their commitment and their devotion to God and his way of living with their words and then proceed to do something completely different with their lives? Have we ever been known to do this before? Yeah, absolutely, right? I think that these verses show us that, man, this is actually an incredibly huge deal. As image bearers of God, like whom he is trusted to carry his image, his goodness, his mission, to be his hands and his feet and his representation in the world, right? Like on mission for him, like what we do and like what we claim about him with our words actually matters a lot. Because if we live inconsistently with this, what does that do to the image of God and his reputation in the world, right? There was a study done of over 2,000 adults who had come to faith later in life. It's a book. It's called I Once Was Lost. Totally recommend reading this. This was awesome. And the study was done probably within the last 5 to 7 years or so. The book just came out a year or two ago. And so they interview 2,000 adults who had come to faith later in life. And they talk about some of the barriers and some of the issues that they had to sort of hurdle over as they ended up coming to faith in Jesus. And on the list, like unanimously across the list, and almost at the very top of the list for every single person, but was on every person's list, the very first barrier that they had to come across was mistrust in God. Now here's the deal. They didn't have mistrust in God because they had studied their Bible and they had walked away with issues of his character or his nature, right? That isn't why. Their mistrust in God came from what they had seen from believers, Christians, people who claimed to be followers of Jesus and yet lived completely inconsistently with what he had called them to. And this created this massive mistrust that people had to learn that they could actually trust Christians before they could ever come to trust God. Like, do you know why, like, the second commandment, first and second commandment, are about not having other gods before God, right? Like, second commandment, number 2, is you shall not make any, like, graven image, an idol for yourself. You know, we oftentimes think that's about, like, some other gods, but that's what the first commandment's about, right? You should not have other gods before me. That's commandment 1. Commandment 2, you should not make any graven image for yourself. And the idea is this. That's actually about the real God. It's that we wouldn't reduce the Creator God down to any image available to us within creation. We wouldn't craft God into something of our making. And why is that? And I am convinced this is like Satan's number one tactic in the world, right? It's why idolatry is such a huge problem in the Old Testament. Why it's such a huge problem today, right? It's because when that thing that we have created, right, that God that's ultimately going to benefit us, if we can make a God, why wouldn't we make it to benefit us, right? It's when we make that thing and that thing fails us, who do we reject in that moment? Like, we run away from the real God in that moment, right? And dude, that is like Satan's number one tactic in the world, is that he helps us erect these false images of who God is and how he operates. And when that thing fails us, because it's ultimately just a God of our own making, who do we actually reject in that moment? This is why God, like saying taking his name in vain, is an incredibly, incredibly important thing that he is deadly serious about, right? So, practice what you preach, right? I mean, that's like overly simplistic, right? And you're like, oh, okay, right? Like practice, but I promise you, I'm going somewhere with that, right? Just for now, let's practice what we preach, right? Second, this is also about not trivializing God's name. That is to say that we wouldn't frivolously commit to a truth or reality that we can't support. So taking a vow is this future reality that we are committed to, like, seeing come to fruition, right? Like, we want to see X, Y, or Z happen, and I'm committed to doing whatever it takes to, like, make this thing come to pass, right? That's what making a vow. Now, we have this culture of non-committal in our society that is staggering. Do you know what I mean by that, right? Like, I think it's funny, like, I was scrolling through Facebook this morning, and I saw the meme of the dude that was, like, real happy, and it's like, when I made plans 2 weeks ago, and then the next one is him, like, in bed, looking like he's, like, sick and disgusted, and he's, like, you know, day of, trying to figure out how I'm going to get out of those plans. Everybody's seen that, right? It's hilarious because we can all, like, totally identify with that. And I know that, like, COVID and everybody being separated has just made that tendency worse, right? It's funny, right? And it's funny, though, like, as long as you've never been the person that has needed to rely on another human being for something, right? Like, it's funny until you're in that position that's like, bro, I really needed you to, like, step up and to be here for this, right? And so we would, like, frivolously commit to things that are like, make this vow that we're going to do X, Y, and Z, or see this thing through, or be there for you in this moment, and then we break that, right? This is funny. I did some research on this this week. One of the things that we'll do is, like, pinkies out, right? Pinky swear. You guys ever, I do that with the kids all the time. They'll say something like, Dad, you promise you to go make a snowman today? I'm like, pinky swear, kids. You know, we're doing it, right? Do you know where pinky swear gets its, like, roots at, right? Here's the idea, is that this is from back in the day where, like, a handshake and a promise could buy a piece of property or, like, a business deal. You know, you could, like, enter into a business deal with, like, a handshake and a promise, right? And the idea was pinkies out, like, we're gonna lock pinkies in this moment, is if I don't follow through with this, like, may my pinky be broken off, y'all. That's where it comes from, right? Like, this is, like, I thought about this, like, how many four-fingered car salesmen do you think we would have today if this was still a thing, right? Like, oh, really? Is it really J.D. Power and Associates, like, #1 safety pick for SUVs? And you're like, no, man, for real, it's right there. And you're like, no, we see, right? I'm asking, are you sure, right? And again, like, you may think that's funny, but it's only funny if you've never been in that position where you needed someone else to, like, come through and to be there for you in that moment, right? And here's the deal. I don't think that we just, like, do this. I don't think we do this, like, purposefully. I don't think we're, like, purposefully flaky. I think actually we have really the best intentions, and we want to value people, and we value their situation, and so we'll commit to things. But here's, like, a couple of pieces of practical advice, I think, maybe to connect us with this. One is don't overextend your reach, right? Because this is what gets me most of the times. It's like, man, I do value you. I value your situation. I value your need a lot. And I want to be there for you any way that I can. And so I'll commit to things. And sometimes I make the mistake of committing to things on Wednesdays. And I just can't, man. Like, I have so many things happening on that day. Or maybe it isn't Wednesday. Maybe it's some other day that I have something going on, right? And I commit to this thing because I do value you. And then it's like I have to call and I have to cancel, or I have to say, no, I can't. Actually, I'm so sorry. I totally forgot that I had this thing going on, and I can't be there for you in that moment. Now, what values you more, right? If I tell you on the front end that, like, hey, I really do value you, I value this situation, and I will be there in a heartbeat for you if I could, right? But I actually have this thing going on, so I don't want you to count on me, because that would put you in a really bad position if you had to count on me and then all of a sudden I can't be there, right? And so sometimes, like, being truthful and honest with people in this is like, that's the most, like, how we can value people and show them their value more than anything, is if we're just, like, straight up and honest, as we don't overextend our reach. Another thing is follow through on your commitments. Again, I know it's, like, super simple and this is not profound at all, right? We're going to get to that here in just a second, right? Because but follow through on your commitments. Man, if you tell somebody you're going to go snow shovel their driveway at 3 o'clock this afternoon, like, be there, right? Like, I don't know if that's you or anybody watching. I promise I don't know your situation, right? Like, but if that's, like, if you commit to something, you say that you're going to do X, Y, and Z, like, be there and follow through. Do you know those people, right? Like, you don't even have to think about it, but if I ask who those people are for you, that you know that if they say, dude, I'm going to do blank, you can put it out of your mind. You don't even have to worry about it. Like, they're going to follow through with it, right? Like, do you know those people? Chances are, if you do, you don't have to think about that for very long, right? I know those people. I know who those people are for me, right? Follow through on your commitments. All right, so you guys with me? Everybody good? Okay, so here's the deal. I realize that none of that is, like, profound new information. And that's kind of the point, right? Because that's what Jesus said. You've heard it said, and they had heard it said, and you have heard it said, like, this thing. Maybe you wouldn't have connected those ideas to that passage, right? But you've heard it said. None of that stuff is, like, new information. But what Jesus does now is what he's done every week for the last few weeks, is he adds some new teaching alongside of this. And he calls his followers to something even more radical than these things, right? Even more radical than just practicing what you preach and following through in your commitments. Here's what he says. Matthew 5:34-36. He says, but I say to you, right? Make no oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is the footstool of his feet, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Nor shall you make an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. And immediately you think, dude, what a weird thing to, like, why did Jesus pick these things specifically? Is this like a thing? And it absolutely was a thing. You see, Jesus had some Pharisees in the crowd that was listening to this. And just like we talked last week about, like, sexual desire and sexual ethics, that they had sort of erected these invisible barriers that allowed them to sort of tiptoe around and to go around some of these issues, right? They had done the same thing with this oath because they had heard it said, you should not like swear by God. You're not supposed to do that. Israel realized, like, how dangerous that was and what that could cause, right? Like, and a stolen donkey was at the least end of some of the things that could go wrong when people swore by God, right? And so they had said, like, don't do this. They'd heard this said, and so what they did is they swore by all kinds of other things, right? So if we can't swear by God, then we can swear by, like, the temple. As long as we don't swear by the gold in the temple, like, we're good, right? Because the gold is where the value is at. Temple's just a building, right? Gold is where the value is at. Or, like, we can swear by the altar, man, because that sounds really good. As long as we don't swear by the gift that's on the altar, because that's, like, dude, that's where the value and that's sacred and all this, right? But we can swear by the altar, then that's okay. Or they would swear by a city or by their own head, right? This is like swearing on your mama's grave and she's not even dead yet, right? She doesn't appreciate that, right? Like, here's the idea of this, right? The essence of swearing that Jesus targets here is in invoking something or someone else, especially God, to make your words seem more significant and more weighty than they really are, right? The aim is to impress others. But the reality is that we are having to bring some outside source into our conversation to give our words, our testimony, a legitimacy that they would not have on their own, right? And this is a device of manipulation that is meant to override the judgment of others and to possess them for our own purposes. I'm going to read that again, right? This is a device of manipulation that is meant to override the judgment of others in order to possess them for our purposes. At its root, this is manipulation. In our culture, we would call it spin or good marketing, right? Or whatever, right? Like do we do this? And all of a sudden, this thing that was far and distant is something that, yeah, actually we do this all of the time. This is invasive. We manipulate others through our words in 1,000 different ways, right? I'm just going to name off a few of these, right? Sometimes we will minimize or even leave out certain details of the truth entirely, right? To promote a reality that's consistent with our needs, right? No, man, the car works perfectly, right? And meanwhile, we leave out the details that if you get over 65, it sounds like it's falling apart, right? It does. It works perfectly. Just don't go over 65 and it will continue to work perfectly, right? We will leave out certain details. We will sort of smooth over things. We twist or exaggerate certain details to make the story sound a little better than it actually is, right? Like the size of the fish goes down with every extra fisherman that you have in the boat. That's just like a hard and fast rule. We raise a red herring. Do you guys know what that is, right? This is actually huge in our culture, especially like with the media. This is to say that we will raise some secondary issue that may even be closely related to the topic at hand, and then draw off of its truth or its lies, right, in order to distract or confuse from the issue at hand. And I'll just let you think that out. But that has actually found its way into our culture in some really big ways just over the last year in particular, right? Our political scene has become one giant straw man fallacy. Do you know what that is, right? It's where we will attack the legitimacy of another person to draw away from their words and to give legitimacy to our own argument, right? Like, well, I don't do X, Y, and Z because, like he does or she does, right? Like, I would never do this. Meanwhile, you know that everyone knows that they do this. And all of a sudden now, your argument, your side, like it gains more traction. It gains more legit. And that's a fallacy. That's actually wrong. And it's a device of manipulation that we do. Name dropping, right? Now, I was out the other day with so-and-so, right? And it's like sometimes, like maybe people don't notice when they do that, right? But like 9 times out of 10, I know it's absolutely like a purposeful thing, right? We are using the value of someone else's name to add value to our name, right? Again, a device of manipulation. This is a big one, especially in a military town. Reinventing yourself, right? You know these people, right? That over time you get to know someone and it's like, man, you're not who I knew at first, right? It's like military people go into a new town or, not even military, right? But move to a new town, new job, new church, new year, right? Like this is I'm going to reinvent myself. I'm going to downplay the aspects of my character, my nature, right, that are maybe not so great. And I want to promote this positive image of who I am and how I talk and how I speak, right? And so we'll reinvent ourselves, but in this moment, we're trying to remake ourselves in the eyes of other people is what we're doing, right? We will overemphasize some aspects of the truth, often adding facts or, statistics to lend credibility to our words, right? Did you know that 85% of all statistics are made up, right? I love that. I love that saying because it is so true in so many ways, right? And this is spin. This is just a few examples of some ways that we do this. We experience this every single day in our culture, right? It isn't just social media. That's not the great evil. It happens in conversation. And sometimes we're pretty good at picking up on it, and sometimes we're not. And sometimes we do these things, and we don't even realize that we're doing these things. And it isn't until after the fact when we think about how we talked about this or how we represented ourselves in this situation and realize that actually that was inconsistent with reality, right? It has become so natural to us, and yet Jesus says this is evil. And he doesn't superfluously make that statement about things. Like Jesus doesn't just say things are evil very often. And so when he does, I think it's actually worth stopping and zooming in on why he calls this evil, right? Instead of loving others and honoring them with truthfulness, the intent is to get one's way by verbal manipulation of the thoughts and the choices of others. We hijack their free will for our purposes, right? To support ourselves or to make ourselves look better or to get our way in some situation, right? And here's why Jesus says this is evil, because who does that sound like, right? That sounds like Satan, like the father of lies. Like that is how he operates, right? And to make matters worse, oftentimes, like if we drag God into this, right? Like if we are followers of Jesus and we do this and we live in this sort of way that's inconsistent with how He has called us to live, then what have we done? Man, we've erected an idol in the minds of other people that is going to fail them at some point. This false image of who God is, and we have damaged His reputation, and the end results of this are horrendous in the world around us. We're going to talk about that here in just a second, right? And so here's the solution, though, that Jesus gives us to all of us as individuals. Are you ready for it? It's profound. He says, but let your statement be yes, yes, or no, no, anything beyond these of evil, right? You guys good? Just call it, and we'll go home, right? No, right? Here's what Jesus is saying. This is the whole main idea for this entire thing. Are you ready for it, right? It's this. The weight of our words is not measured by the number of them, but by the life that is backing them up. This is what Jesus is telling us in this moment, that the weight of our words is not measured by the number of them, but by the life that is backing them up. Jesus is advocating for an entire life of integrity, honesty, follow through, right? Openness, like meeting your commitments and your vows and your statements, right? Like Jesus actually made vows and His followers made vows. Like Jesus actually made vows before God. And so the idea is that you would never do this, but this is serious. This is something that we don't do frivolously, and that our words, our life have to match up with what our words are saying, right? And that we would live in such a way that our words can be taken at face value because our life consistently backs them up. Here's the problem. Here's like the difficulty around this topic, though, right? We can look at teachings like this and we can think that Jesus is primarily asking us for behavior modification, right? Well, just like do better, like tell the truth, right? It's easy. Sermon over, right? Just tell the truth and you guys are good, right? Or just live right. That's you guys good with that? That would be so easy if that was like all that was needed. Just come in 3 seconds into the sermon, like, you guys live right. We'll see y'all next week, right? Get some coffee on your way out the door, right? It doesn't work that way, does it? You don't just like pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You don't just like white knuckle it and try harder, do we? That's not how any of this works, is it, right? See, the problem is that to do what Jesus is asking us takes an entire life makeover, right? To live a life that is so consistently like following after Jesus in every aspect that it speaks for itself. That yes can just mean yes. And when we tell people that we're going to do something, that like, dude, they can just put it out of their mind, and we're one of those people that they think about when they think about this, right? Like that because we're people who follow through on our commitments, that can be trusted, that what we say matters, and it's going to come to pass because we said it, and our life is going to be the measure of that, right? See, the problem is there's no behavior modification without first having this heart transformation. And this brings us back to the gospel, right? This is like the root and this is the essence of the gospels. That, man, you can't do this, right? You can't live that kind of life, right? Like man, I don't know if you've noticed even this week, just think back on it. Like how many times have you done one of the things just on that list? Not to mention the 10,000 other things that we do that like aren't actually operating in truthfulness. Like, how quickly can we fall into that trap and to say something so like frivolous and superfluously that like, man, like it's a lie before we even knew it was a lie, right? Man, this is the root and the essence of the gospel is that, man, you can't do it. Right? You can't live that kind of life. Like, you will never be good enough in your own power and under your own strength. So, man, if we are going to attain to this, then we need something else. We need like a higher and a greater authority like working in us and through us. And this is the gospel, and this is the good news, is that we can't be good enough. But we don't have to be because Jesus was good enough. And He comes and He imparts His goodness and His righteousness and His holiness to us as we stop, as we turn away from our efforts to be good enough, and we lean into Him and to His finished work on the cross on our behalf, right? And here's the deal, is that maybe some of you listening online or here are hearing this for the very first time. And man, in order for us to live this kind of life, it takes a new heart being like worked in us for these actions to flow out of that new heart, right? Like every action that we do flows out of the intentions of our heart. And so for us to live this kind of life and to be this kind of like truth speaker, man, we have to have a new heart that this can emanate out of. And man, if you've heard this for the 1,000th time, and this is something that you've accepted long, long ago, right? And this is like the 1,000th time you've heard like the gospel presentation, then guess what? Like you need it just as much. Like today, tomorrow, the next day, right? 2 or 3 times the day after that, right? In that moment that you're standing around at work, and all of a sudden there comes this opportunity to like twist the truth or glaze over some details or say something that like maybe is a little less than truthful, or live in some way that's inconsistent with what you know Jesus has called you to, right? Like, what do you do in that moment is you go back to the gospel yet again and let its goodness and let its power like come in afresh and wash over you anew, like in that moment, right? So let me ask you a question. Can you think of any bigger obstacle, like for a community of people who are moving towards healthy, whole, loving relationships than this issue, right? Can you think of a bigger obstacle than this issue right here to that type of community? And I actually can't. I tried to. I mean, how can we have community if we're all peddling this false image of ourselves, right? That this has become so normal in our culture. Nobody really knows anyone in this type of community. So we can't actually have real community, can we, right? And I wish I could say that this is just a problem within the church and something that we could work out here within our walls or whatever, right? But like how we live out this ethic affects things outside of this, right? How could our community be different if every single one of us lived out this type of life, right? Like, man, what could that type of truth do for our community? And I think it could be revolutionary is what it could be, right? There's a story. This isn't my story. I want to leave you guys with this story. It's about Adrian Rogers. You may know Adrian Rogers. He was like the prince of preachers. You can I would like look him up, man. He's got some awesome stuff out there online. He is dead now. But he used to be a pastor in Memphis. And the story goes that he was shopping, grocery store, Hallmark or something one day, I don't know. And cashier gives him back his change. He kind of quickly puts it in his wallet. He goes home, and it's a true story. He realizes that there's too much money in his wallet later that night. Like, oh my goodness, I got to fix this, right? And here's the deal, man. You get too much money back. Like, how many people has that happened to you, right? Probably all of us at some point in time, either too much money or, you find a wallet, whatever the case is. These moments of like quiet integrity, right? They're like, had he not done this, had he not went back and like returned the money, like chances are it would have never been found out, right? Like at least that's how we feel about it. But in this situation, it actually would have been found out because he goes back the next day and he goes to take the money back and he actually finds the girl at the register that gave him the change back and he says, hey man, I don't know if you remember me, I was in here yesterday. I think you gave me too much change back. And she said, yeah, she said, actually, I know I did. She said, I did it on purpose. And he's sort of like floored in this moment. She says, I know you, actually. She said, you're Adrian Rogers. She said, I've heard you preach. She said, I know about your church. And she said, honestly, I just wanted to see if you practice what you preached or not. So he's kind of like mouth open. And she says, I will be the young girl that walks the aisle this week as you give the invitation to follow after Jesus and to join your church. Man, here's the deal. We see like what is, right? Like I know that may be like super philosophical or whatever. Like, we see what is. Like only God can see what could be or what might come to pass, right? And we have no idea how the little choices, right? Like the little Christmas bonus stories and the little times that we glaze over the truth or we put some spin on our words. We increase hype for the sake of like winning people to our side of the argument or getting our way or manipulating other people, right? Living inconsistently, like taking God's name in vain. And that, like, we have no idea of the consequences of those things because we can only see what is, right? We only see the effects of that after the fact, right? Meanwhile, God can see like what is, or what, not only what is, but what could be one day. I mean, how many people, like that girl at the store, the cash register there, man, like how many people have been negatively impacted? Like how many people could potentially spend like an eternity separated from God because of choices that we actually think are really small or frivolous? things that we say and things that we do that are inconsistent with the way that Jesus has called us to live as his followers, right? And we don't give it a second thought because it's actually so normalized in our culture, right? Like the flaky, like failure to commitment in our society, right? Like that is so normalized. Like we're just one of everyone else if we fall into that pattern, right? And yet God can see like what could have been and the things that could happen, like had we not done those things and had we lived consistently with this ethic. And this is what Jesus' kingdom is all about, man, is that he has raised this higher standard of truth that he calls his followers to. And we have this choice every single day to go back to the gospel and to let it like wash over us anew and let its goodness of its message and its power like sort of like run our lives. Like, as we look back to Jesus as the one who like calls the shots in our life every single day. To live consistently with these things because the effects of this are far-reaching. We have no idea what goes on and what is affected by these small, like trivial choices, the frivolous words that we speak that we don't give a second thought to, right? And yet, man, the reach and the effects of these, man, they travel the world over. 7 billion people making this choice every day, and look where it's gotten us, right? And Jesus' kingdom is radically different than this. And this is the good news of Jesus' kingdom, is that Jesus' kingdom is a kingdom of truth. And that has no place in Jesus' kingdom, right? That has no place here in our churches. That has no place amongst us, right? That has no place in our community, because if that does exist in our community, then we actually don't have community at all. And that's the truth about that, right? So, man, I want to like challenge us to a higher standard in this regard, right? And it isn't just behavior modification. The challenge is to go back to the gospel every single day. The challenge for you actually may be to go back to the gospel for the very first time and to hear it with fresh ears and to see it with fresh eyes this morning, right? As you choose to follow after Jesus with everything that you have, right? As we choose to let who he is be true for us and what he has said about our world be true as he comes in and calls the shots in our life. And I'm not going to this is a point I think where like sometimes we give like the prayer or whatever. Like I don't want to do that because there's no secret formula to this. There's no like secret prayer. This is a decision that you have to make on your own. And there's no secret words or like formula to do that. It's just a decision for you to turn away from you being the one who calls the shots in your life and turning towards Jesus. And if you do that this morning, I really encourage you to have a conversation. Like we would love to talk with you about that. To get with this week, all of our information is on our website, or you can get with us through Facebook or whatever, and or have the conversation next week when you join us. That would be some awesome conversation to get to have with you next week. Are you guys good? Very good. Awesome. You guys pray with me as we close things out. Father God, we love you and we praise you. We just thank you for everything that you are doing in us and through us. We just thank you for how you're moving in our community. Father, we just thank you for your kingdom of truth and life. Father, that is like can revolutionize our world and is wanting to revolutionize our world if we would just participate in the mission of Jesus. Father, let's pray that we would be a people of truth, that speak truth and live consistently with what you've called us to, Father. We just ask that we would be a light, we would be salt this week as we travel into our world, and that you would bring us back together in safety next week as well. In Jesus' name, amen. Awesome. Thanks, guys. Yeah, man, I'm so glad.